The lights blinked back ferociously at my eyes. I groaned as my head thumped loudly with the migraine. "Layla," a voice whispered from my right. My head snapped in the direction, trying to look for it. But my eyes struggled, it seemed like everything has turned upside down. "Layla, over here," the voice spoke again, and my eyes searched with fervor until they found his. "James," I exclaimed, and he shook his head urgently. "Keep quiet, kid," he hissed, looking around him cautiously. His harsh tone ticked me off, and I was ready to burst at him when I realized he was hanging upside down. It meant I was too. My anger dissipated into confusion and fear. "James, where are we?" I asked, and suddenly my vision blanked, nausea building up in my body. "Kid, listen to me carefully," James spoke. Was that concern in his voice? I blinked slowly. No, it must be the blood pooling to my skull by the very minute. "Layla, the couple we came to rob were crazy. It took me by surprise, that's why we were caught. They've kept us in this basement, like this, for about 45 minutes now. I have no idea how they got the strength to hang us from the roof like this." As he spoke, I opened my eyes and looked at him. His brown eyes illuminated in the light of the basement, his face reddened by the blood which had rushed to his face. It was probably the first time I'd seen color on his carefully structured pale face. His thick eyelashes blinked as he realized I wasn't listening to him anymore. He scowled, his mouth hardening. "Layla, I don't know if you're going to be okay, but I need you to be strong. I'll find a way to break through these ropes, and we can escape," he spoke reassuringly when the sound of a door opening interrupted our conversation. I winced at the sound, my eardrums popping. "Ah, so the two aliens have awoken," an old voice spoke with a jolly lilt. I inched to my side to get a better view. They were both short, wrinkly, and frail. "Aliens?" James asked, incredulity lacing his words. "We know what you are," the old woman spoke proudly, her hand resting on a heavy wooden club. It was either a result from being suspended in the air or the foolishness of this situation, but I laughed, small giggles blurting out with the limited air. James' eyebrows raised upside down, and that ignited another row of giggles. "These loonies think we're aliens," I shrieked with laughter, my abdomen straining from the exercise. James deepened his scowl and shook his head. The man's mustache twitched as he looked at me, and in an instant, a burning blow hit my stomach. I whimpered with pain, the air rushing out from my mouth painfully, and I felt the blood trickling from my mouth. "Don't touch her again," James yelled, and he leapt up to reach for the ropes that tied his feet, but the woman was faster, and she threw the club at him. It came into contact with his back, and I could hear the sickening thump as James groaned and fell back, his hands dangling dangerously. "James!" I screamed and coughed. He appeared to have passed out. My heart throbbed as I thought about the situation. Life couldn't have gotten any worse. I was stuck with a thief in the basement of a psychotic couple who believed we were aliens. And now James was unconscious. He was my best bet of getting out of this situation. I was at this old couple's mercy. The woman chuckled as she walked towards James and extended her hand, holding his long black locks, pulling mercilessly. "He seems strong, well-formed," she remarked, and leant forward, sniffing his head. I felt disgusted, violated on the behalf of James. I knew he'd have punched her the second she came close to him, which sounded wrong considering she was old, but the situation begged nothing else. I wanted nothing more but to hurt her for hurting him. "Whoa, calm down," a voice spoke in my head, and I jerked. That damned voice, it was back. "You feel an awful lot of hate for someone who hurt James," it spoke, and I knew it had an infuriating smirk on its face. "Of course I am, he's my way out. I can't lose him," I spoke, and the voice laughed. "If that makes you feel better." I growled lowly, and the couple stopped inspecting James, only to look at me. "It seems the girl hates us touching her mate," the woman chuckled and came forward. "He isn't my mate, you ugly hag, stop sniffing at him, it's disgusting," I spoke acidly. The woman's eyes hardened. "It seems this one has a bit of a mouth on her," she said, and swung her hand, her dry skin and bones coming in contact with my face painfully. I wheezed, the pressure on my head increasing. "What do you want with us?" I screeched, and the man came forward this time. "Let me take care of her, Mar," he said, and his face contorted. His expression ran a shiver through my body, I recognized it too well. "Henry, be careful. We don't know what she can do." His wife spoke in the back, and I gasped. How could she stand aside and let him do this to me? Did she not care that I was a helpless woman? Or a helpless alien? The voice urged. I rolled my eyes. Either these two were genuinely crazy, or they just needed an excuse to hurt and torture us. "Well, you and James initiated it," the voice remarked cattishly. "You should really learn to shut up," I scolded the voice, and then slapped my forehead. I forgot to think and spoke out loud. Henry walked towards me, unbuttoning his pants. My eyes widened as I realized his intent was strong. He really did not care. "Don't be stupid, Layla, he's hanging you from his ceiling. You thought his intent wasn't strong?" The voice scolded me back, and I shuddered. "Please don't do this," I spoke, my voice cracking. Suddenly, I was no longer in the room, but in the attic of the old house, my arms filled with blue bruises, my legs torn apart, my 5-year-old body slashed and taken. My eyes filled with tears, and I started breathing quickly, the oxygen slowly leaving my body. Please don't," I quivered, my body hacking with the sobs. I couldn't breathe anymore, I was lost and spiraling. "Layla, listen to me, you're okay." I felt his sturdy arms wrap around my body. "Layla, kid, you're safe. He isn't here anymore." He brought me close to his chest, and I felt his strength pooling around me. "James," I bore my eyes into his, and he looked away quickly. I realized I was lounging on his lap and flew away like a cat coming in contact with water. "Aw, thank you for saving my life, James, I'm indebted to you for life. How may I serve you?" James spoke dramatically. I huffed and rolled my eyes. "You can start by wearing a maid's uniform," he replied to himself and chuckled heartily, as if he'd said the funniest thing on earth. "Very funny, James, here's a red ball for your clown costume," I retorted, and he stopped for a second, smirking at me. I inhaled as I looked at him. He stood at a distance, his tall form towering over everything else. His muscles flexed through the white shirt he wore, which had gotten dirty over the scuffle. He caught me watching at him and raised his eyebrows, running a hand over his trimmed beard. "We need to get out of here," he said, and I nodded. Then I remembered. "What happened with the couple?" I asked as I looked around me. The basement was empty except for the both of us. I had pretended to lose consciousness so I could get enough time to break loose from the ropes. The second they had their backs turned, I took the club and knocked them out. He paused for a second and averted his eyes. I'm sorry, I wasn't fast enough. That disgusting animal shouldn't have gotten that close to you." He spoke somberly, his fists clenched. My heart throbbed with a new emotion, and I leapt forward at him, encasing him in my arms. He staggered back with surprise, but after a while I felt him arms wrapping around my waist. "Thank you," I whispered and stepped away. He nodded and walked over to the stairs. "You coming?" he asked, and I smiled as I ran after him. Never would I have imagined that I'd go with a thief like him willingly. Times were changing after all. "You're so predictable," the voice berated, but I pushed it aside.